We've now reached the quarterfinals of the FIDE World Cup, and there was only one decisive game in the matches, and that came in the encounter between Levon Aronian and Vasily Ivanchuk. Aronian with the white pieces, and it's an English, well, a kind of English Catalan. If white plays d4, then we transpose into a Catalan. But instead of waiting for d4 before taking on c4, Ivanchuk takes on c4 straight away. So this is, yeah, Reti, Catalan, English. I'm not quite sure exactly what you call this, but it's a very well-known line. So white regains the pawn with the check, and now black seeks to activate this queen's bishop. It's easy to develop these guys, but it's the queen's bishop which is the problem. So Ivanchuk does this by putting the bishop on b7. Now, it doesn't look brilliant there, but the idea is that soon black is going to try to break with the c5 move. So there we go, black is developing the queen side. It looks like a fairly tame start to the game from both sides, but actually this position is rich. I mean, all the pieces are on the board, apart from, you know, a pawn exchange. And Aronian specialises in these systems that seem at first sight fairly innocuous, but actually contain a great deal of venom. Well, you could say that the normal move here is to play knight to f6. And then a6. Now you can see black is protecting that pawn, is getting ready to push with c5. And this is the kind of struggle that takes place. So again, a little bit more pressure here, and white is hoping that this pawn will advance and then you can use the c4 square. So this is a very typical kind of struggle, and black breaks. Anyway, this is one particular game, Lee against Giri from Tromsø 2013, for example, and black gives up this pawn but gets activity. This is absolutely typical. But instead of playing the normal move knight f6, Ivanchuk plays rook c8, and he thought for 15 minutes over this move. Well, it's opposite the queen, but at the moment certainly the c-file isn't going to break open. Aronian castled. Now a6, black is getting ready to play c5 by protecting this pawn. And now d4. Well, in this position, Ivanchuk thought for 42.5 minutes, which at move 10 is a huge chunk of time. And remember, he's already thought for almost 15 minutes over rook c8. And I think the problem is that he realised that the move that he's been building up to, c5, is actually extremely problematic. And he was somehow trying to justify playing this move. Still, the best move, I think, would be knight f6 here. Although after knight e5, just opening up the bishop's diagonal, you can see it's not easy to get in c5, and white already has a bit of an initiative. So Ivanchuk went for his break c5 anyway, and in that big think, of course, he must have realised that white could play this move d5. So obviously, if this is taken, this is exactly what black wants, and then bishop takes, and yeah, black is developing really nicely, really active pieces, not what white wants. So that's why d5 comes, to keep the c-file closed and to open up the centre. This is a really powerful move. Ivanchuk took, and now knight h4. So white is a pawn down, but there is enormous pressure on the d5 pawn, and you can see it's pinned. It's still this wonderful Catalan bishop on g2 striking across the board that causes black enormous problems. Well, once again, the most normal move here would be to develop the king's knight and prepare to get castled on the king's side. But, well, rook d1 puts more pressure on d5. White is always going to win this pawn back. There's no problem with that. And after white does recapture, then has a wonderful initiative. So, for example, here, bishop e7, so black still striving to castle kingside. And now, Aronian said after the game that he was thinking just to recapture here. And after these exchanges, well, there are problems on the d-file. If black takes, and, well, if queen takes pawn, then queen f5 looks very, very strong for white, with pressure here. Black's king is still in the middle, and there's bishop g5 coming, doesn't look good. So castle's kingside, and again, white has a wonderful initiative. This is highly unpleasant. Now, it looks as though white is winning this piece, but black can survive with queen f6. But here, white would simply win a pawn. Rook takes c5. So this is very pleasant. Apart from taking on d5, white can also play knight f5 first, and after castles then take on d5. This also gives white a fantastic initiative. Well, clearly Ivanchuk appreciated this and was trying to find an alternative, and he came up with knight df6, which is a bit ugly. You can see these knights, well, the queen's knights, gets in the way of the king's knight. So rook d1, again from Aronian, and these pins are highly unpleasant. And this was Ivanchuk's idea. He wanted to keep this annoying knight away from f5. So this, if the knight wants to get back into the game, it has to reroute via f3. Aronian crashed in. Knight takes d5. Not a complicated combination. White simply wins the piece back immediately because of the pin. So Ivanchuk develops the bishop and plays knight f6. Of course, ideally black would wish to keep the e-file closed, but then white wins immediately with pawn to d6, opening up the diagonal, and if bishop takes bishop, then d7 simply wins material. Check. So knight f6 had to be played, but now the e-file is open. So a simple move, queen e2 check, and once again there's this tactic on the long diagonal. Black ideally would wish to block with the queen, but d6 check wins the bishop. So after queen e2 check, black is forced to play king f8, and this is horrible because it just takes so much time for black to bring the king's rook in the game. The king is also not particularly secure on f8. White has a tremendous position, and now Aronian managed to find a very simple, very straightforward plan just to maintain this wonderful initiative. a4, attacking pawn on b5. And this basically just creates a little weakness in these pawns, just breaks up the pawns, allowing white pieces to come in. So, well, if this is taken, this is pretty horrible. The rook comes into the game, and dreadful. And this pawn is weak. And black wants to keep the queen side closed, so Ivanchuk played b4, but now this pawn is really weak, and the c4 square can be used. So bishop e3, very simple play. Queen d6, blockading the d-pawn at least and protecting this, but very simple moves. Rook c1, and you can see all white's pieces are in play. And, well, if this would be a kind of, well, still a bad position, but perhaps playable position, if this king's rook stood on this square here, but with the king's rook so completely out of the game, this is actually just a lost position. The knight swings back into play. So basic threat is to play knight g5 and knight e4. So h6 played, and also Ivanchuk is dreaming of putting the king on h7. But it's too slow. Knight d2. And there we go. Aronian manages to use this square that he created with his pawn move a4. King g8. It's too slow. And now knight e4. Well, okay, he went to e4 instead of c4 because he wants to attack the c5 pawn, but c4 also good. But yeah, this is even better, hitting c5 pawn. The queen came back, and in this position after d6, Ivanchuk resigned already after just 24 moves. Absolutely shocking. Why did he resign so early? Well, he had good reason to in this position, actually. For example, if black continues with king h7, then white can simply take the pawn on c5. You could also play check, and bishop takes b7, hitting rook and pawn. And otherwise, well, I guess the only way to avoid this is to play bishop takes knight. But this is absolutely horrendous. The king's still stuck. Bishop b7 threatened. It's just a miserable position. Now, and the a pawn is on prise already. Absolutely catastrophic defeat from Ivanchuk by Ivanchuk there. You know, he's so mercurial. One day he's playing absolutely superb chess, defeated Aguirre superbly, and then crashes out with this game. Of course, there's still game 2 to go, so if Ivanchuk wins, he's still in it. But not looking good for Ivanchuk, and Aronian, well, a pretty easy victory for him.